November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. The Soviet Union collapses 2 years later. Francis Fukuyama declares the end of history. Socialism is dead. The West has won. Roll the credits on the Cold War. Except the story didn't end. The revolution didn't die. It just changed uniforms. Today, Canada criminalizes speech. European nations prosecute citizens for social media posts. American schools teach children that their country is inherently oppressive. Major corporations promote ideologies that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. How did this happen? How did Western nations that defeated socialism abroad adopt socialist thinking at home? And why didn't anyone see it coming? The answer lies with an Italian communist who died in 1937, decades before the Cold War ended. His name was Antonio Gramsci. And his strategy for revolution is being executed right now, in real time, across every Western democracy. Antonio Gramsci was a Marxist theorist who asked a question that haunted communists throughout the 20th century: why did the revolution fail in the West? Marx had predicted that industrial workers in advanced capitalist countries would rise up, overthrow their oppressors, and establish communist societies. But it never happened. Workers in America, Britain, France, and Germany didn't want revolution. They wanted better wages, safer working conditions, and property ownership. Gramsci realized something crucial. You cannot impose communism on people who don't want it through economic arguments alone. Workers who own homes, who have savings, who can improve their lives through effort and enterprise, these people will never voluntarily embrace a system that promises to take it all away and redistribute it. So Gramsci developed a different strategy. If you cannot win the economic argument, change the culture. If you cannot convince workers to abandon capitalism, convince their children that capitalism is evil. If you cannot take power through revolution, take power through institutions. He called this cultural hegemony. The idea that whoever controls culture, education, media, law, art, language itself controls society. Change what people believe is normal, moral, and true, and you change everything without firing a single shot. Gramsci wrote, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." He was describing the transition period, the cultural revolution that would dismantle Western civilization from within before building something new in its place. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Western conservatives celebrated. They believed they had won. Socialism was discredited. The economic argument was settled. Markets worked. Central planning failed. End of story. But while conservatives were celebrating victory, Gramsci's disciples were executing his strategy. They had already been doing so for decades. The long march through the institutions began in the 1960s. Students radicalized during that era didn't give up when their revolutions failed. They didn't abandon their ideology when the Soviet Union collapsed. They simply changed tactics. They became teachers, professors, journalists, lawyers, HR directors. They entered every institution that shapes culture, and slowly, methodically, deliberately, they began transforming those institutions from within. Axel Kaiser, the Chilean economist and political philosopher, explains this precisely. The New Left abandoned the factory floor for the university classroom. They stopped trying to organize workers and started indoctrinating students. They realized that controlling what people think is more powerful than controlling what they produce. Let's examine how this works in practice, because understanding the mechanism is essential to recognizing it when you see it. Stage 1. Capture education. This is the foundation of everything else. If you control what children learn, you control what the next generation believes. In the 1960s and 70s, radical leftists enter universities as graduate students. By the 1980s and 90s, they're tenured professors. By the 2000s, they're department chairs and deans. By 2024, they control entire universities. What do they teach? Not traditional subjects focused on skills and knowledge. They teach critical theory, the idea that all of Western civilization is built on oppression. Critical race theory, gender theory, post-colonial theory, queer theory. Each one designed to deconstruct and delegitimize traditional Western values. Students don't learn history as a complex story of human achievement and failure. They learn that history is nothing but oppressor groups exploiting victim groups. They don't learn literature as great works examining the human condition. They learn to deconstruct texts to find hidden power structures and oppression. The goal isn't education in the traditional sense. The goal is what Gramsci called creating organic intellectuals, people who will carry the revolutionary message into every other institution. Stage 2. Capture media. If you control information, you control reality itself. Journalists trained in universities captured by critical theory naturally frame every story through that lens. Traditional objectivity, the idea that journalists should report facts and let readers decide, gets replaced by advocacy journalism. The belief that journalism should actively promote social justice and challenge power structures. But here's the crucial detail: they only challenge certain power structures. Traditional institutions like family, religion, national identity, private property, these are fair game. But new power structures, diversity, bureaucracies, environmental agencies, international organizations, these are protected and promoted. In Canada, this reached its logical conclusion. Bill C-16 compels speech. Citizens can be prosecuted for using the wrong pronouns. Professor Jordan Peterson became internationally famous simply for saying he wouldn't comply with compelled speech. The fact that this was controversial shows how far the cultural shift had progressed. In Europe, the situation is even more extreme. Citizens face criminal prosecution for social media posts criticizing immigration policy or questioning gender ideology. In the United Kingdom, police literally show up at people's homes to check their thinking after posting something deemed offensive online. This isn't hyperbole. This is documented fact. The revolution has progressed so far that Western democracies now criminalize speech in ways the Soviet Union would have admired. Stage 3. Capture law. If you control what is legal and illegal, you control behavior itself. Law schools became captured even earlier than other institutions. By the 1980s, critical legal studies was a dominant movement teaching that law is nothing but power disguised as principle. That constitutional rights are tools of oppression. That objectivity and neutrality are myths that maintain existing hierarchies. Lawyers and judges trained in this ideology don't see their role as applying neutral principles fairly. They see themselves as activists using law to achieve social justice outcomes. The results are everywhere. In Canada, human rights tribunals can punish people for offensive speech without the normal legal protections of criminal trials. In Europe, hate speech laws expand constantly to cover more and more topics. In the United States, selective prosecution based on political ideology becomes increasingly normal. Traditional legal concepts, due process, presumption of innocence, equality before the law, get reinterpreted through the lens of equity, which means different rules for different identity groups depending on where they sit in the oppressor-victim hierarchy. Now here's what makes this so insidious. It doesn't feel like revolution. It feels like progress, like enlightenment, like moral evolution. That's the genius of Gramsci's strategy. Traditional communist revolution is violent and obvious. People resist, but cultural revolution feels like a natural progression. Each change seems small, reasonable, compassionate. Inclusive language, diversity training, sensitivity guidelines, hate speech laws. These all sound positive. Who could oppose inclusion? Who wants to be on the side of hate? But each small change shifts the cultural baseline. What was normal yesterday becomes problematic today and illegal tomorrow. The boundaries of acceptable thought narrow continuously. The revolution advances not through dramatic confrontation, but through 1,000 small surrenders. And anyone who objects, anyone who says this has gone too far, gets labeled a bigot, a fascist, an enemy of progress. The revolution doesn't debate its critics, it delegitimizes them. It makes dissent socially and professionally costly. Let me show you how far this has progressed with specific examples from 2023 and 2024. Canada. A Christian school in British Columbia faces potential closure because it requires teachers to agree with traditional Christian teaching on marriage and sexuality. The government argues that expressing these views creates an unsafe environment. Traditional religious belief is being redefined as a threat to safety. United Kingdom. A woman is arrested and convicted for silently praying outside an abortion clinic. Not protesting, not speaking, praying silently. The thought itself has become criminal. Scotland. The Hate Crime Act makes it illegal to express views that cause offense based on various protected characteristics. The police literally encourage people to report offensive speech, including statements made in private homes. Ireland. Proposed hate speech legislation would criminalize possession of material deemed hateful, even if you never share it. Possession of wrongthink becomes a crime. These aren't isolated incidents. This is the pattern. Western democracies are systematically criminalizing traditional beliefs and normalizing ideologies that would have been considered fringe extremism 20 years ago. And now we arrive at the present moment, where we can see the endgame of Gramsci's strategy. The revolution has nearly completed its march through the institutions. Education, captured. Media, captured. Law, increasingly captured. Corporate culture, captured. Entertainment, captured. The question is no longer whether this is happening. The question is whether it can be reversed. And that answer depends on understanding what we're actually fighting against, because this isn't about left versus right in the traditional sense. This is about liberty versus control, individual rights versus collective identity, truth versus narrative, reality versus ideology. Subscribe right now, because in the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly how this ideology is being weaponized through immigration policy, why family and faith are the final targets, and what Venezuela and Cuba teach us about where this road ends. The revolution didn't end with the Soviet Union, it just changed strategies. And unless we understand what we're facing, we'll lose everything our ancestors built without even realizing we were in a fight.